Hi, I'm James, and this is the Service Design Show, episode 230.
Let's be honest, when we're deep in a project, sustainability might not be the first word on our clients' minds or even ours. But what if focusing on making our services more sustainable wasn't just an ethical add-on, but actually led to better performance, happier users, and a healthier bottom line? Could there be a genuine win-win-win hiding in plain sight? Let's find out. Hi, if you're new here, welcome to the Service Design Show, where we invite the brightest minds in our field and explore what's truly needed to design great services that resonate with people, push businesses forward, and yes, honor our planet. Today we are joined by James Chudley, a seasoned professional and author who's now channeling his experience towards a mission many of us are starting to grapple with: the environmental impact of the services we design. His roots are in environmental science, but a pivotal career shift saw him deeply immersed in the digital agency world, becoming an information architect when the field was just taking shape. This unique blend of understanding ecological systems and designing user-centered solutions makes his perspective particularly valuable right now. James isn't just talking theory. He's focused on providing practical tools and fostering confidence within the design community. And a little something you might not guess, he's got a hidden talent for cricket ball throwing. James is with us to explore how we can translate the big idea of sustainability into concrete actions in our daily design work. So in this conversation, we are exploring what a truly sustainable service actually looks like beyond the environmental angle, how a real-world project optimizing user experience surprisingly slashed its carbon footprint too, a core principle of minimizing that can make your services simpler and more efficient, simple ways for weaving sustainability into the design tools we are already using, like journey maps, how to move from feeling overwhelmed by sustainability to finding actionable first steps, and why we might all be climate designers already, whether we realize it or not. Now, one of the things I often grapple with, and I'm sure many of us do, is how to bring up topics like sustainability when clients aren't explicitly asking for it. James offers a really insightful way to think about this. He calls it using performance as a Trojan horse. We get into what that actually means and how reframing the benefits can open up completely new conversations. Whether you are an in-house professional or working client agency side, his perspectives offer some very useful ways to approach those tricky stakeholder discussions. There's a lot of practical wisdom in what James shares, and I'm really interested to see how these ideas resonate with you. So let's jump into the conversation with James Chudley, and I'll be back at the end with a few of my own closing thoughts. I'm your host, Mark Fontijn, and you are listening to the Service Design Show. A very warm welcome to the Service Design Show, James. It's great to have you on.
Hey, Mark, it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. We're going to talk about a very interesting topic, which has been touched upon lightly in the past 229 episodes. We're going to explore sustainable services. You seem to have a deep passion for that, and a big curiosity, maybe a lot of questions as well, which we can explore together. But before we dive into all the intricacies of that topic, how do you define a sustainable service? What do you see when you think of a sustainable service?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting word, isn't it? And to be honest, it's a word that I've struggled with in the past. up until recently, I was working within an organization called CX Partners, who were part of another big organization called Soprasteria. And we had a bit of like a group who were really interested in sustainability. And we thought, well, how can we, this is really important and something that we need to do. But what do we mean by it? And then I think we all just had an existential crisis for about a month because we really struggled. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we all kind of knew what we meant, but for whatever reason, it became such a difficult word to try and define, particularly in the context of the work that we were doing. What does it actually mean? And I was sort of thinking, well, fundamentally, organizations are asking us to work on their services to help to improve them. So from that point of view, sustainability should be thinking about making those organizations more sustainable. So giving them the best possible chance of lasting as long as possible to be able to serve the people they're serving. So I was sort of thinking about it within that context. So helping organizations to hang around for a bit longer, which you'd like to imagine they'd want to do. And then, of course, there's the kind of thinking about it from the perspective of the impact of those organisations and the services they're offering upon the environment and upon society. So, sort of minimising their impact to kind of make sure that they're, going back to the kind of the original definition of sustainability. I think I learned during my environmental science degree was all about kind of meeting the needs of the present without sacrificing the needs of the future. Which was helpful because in the context of user experience and service design, we talk a lot about user needs. So I was sort of riffing on that, thinking, well, maybe it's about meeting the user needs of the present day without compromising your ability to meet the user needs of the future. So yeah, and there's a third way I think about it in terms of making the work of service designers feel sustainable. Like it's not an easy job. It's lots of people can feel very overwhelmed and burnt out because often you're juggling and feeling like an impossible set of challenges. And so you need to be able to work in such a way that your energy is maintained and to give you the best chance of kind of having the impact you want to have. So I think an angle in terms of the sustainability of practitioners as well.
Mm.
So yeah, I think about it in lots of different terms actually.
Multifaceted, which is
Yeah.
interesting. The fact that you sort of articulate the push or the desire or the movement towards sustainable services implicitly also means, maybe question mark, that existing services are unsustainable. Is that the
Yeah.
case?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been focusing most recently specifically around digital. Since learning, I go to a brilliant service design meetup group in Bristol in the UK where I'm based, and I encourage anyone in the area to come along. It's fantastic. And they've just last night I went and they've just had their 10th meeting. So they had a little celebration. I think probably one of the fourth or fifth ones was run by a chap called Ned Gartside who works for DEFRA, and he's a real pioneer in terms of sustainability in the context of services. And he was giving a presentation about services and talking about introduced me to the Web Sustainability Guidelines, which I'd never come across, and was absolutely fascinated by those, and have subsequently gone on this bit of a mission to focus exactly on digital specifically, because the idea of trying to make services more sustainable felt really a difficult starting point because they're quite amorphous. They have digital touch points, physical touch points, which makes them potentially harder to try and benchmark and minimize, if you like. Where I thought actually we start with digital stuff, then it feels easier to benchmark and manage and a bit smaller. But then I learned, the internet is responsible for more CO2 emissions than the aviation industry, and it kind of blew my mind. So any service with a digital component, of which of course there are many, is likely to be unsustainable in those terms, just in terms of the environmental impact alone, let alone the kind of broader aspects of sustainability in terms of, say, societal impact. What are the unintended consequences that services are having upon excluding members of society, upon all sorts of different aspects of sustainability. So inevitably services are probably not sustainable.
That's fascinating to think about because we sort of see landfills of unused product or products that got obsolete, and you feel that is unsustainable. You just
Mm.
see the landfills, landfills. With services, it's hidden, like it's invisible, right?
Yeah.
The impact on us, on the environment, on the businesses, which makes it a lot harder.
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? It's like, I think you would like to imagine that these ideas of sustainability are only becoming more present in people's minds. I mean, all the talk recently about the impact of AI is a really interesting example, and AI is probably doing us a big favour in terms of raising the public's awareness of the environmental impact of digital things, which is a really hard thing for people to understand. And I totally get it, and it blew my mind when I first started thinking about it. It's like, well, how can the internet create emissions? I don't understand. I'm not a technical person. I don't really understand what goes on under the bonnet. It's like
Hmm.
it's a bit of a mystery. I've always been involved, at a very, I guess, a superficial level in terms of designing interfaces, but not really understanding what's happening in the background. So you're right, and that kind of the physical side of it is huge, but it's difficult to see that. So it's not something that people think about. So
Mm.
you're right. It's a big, it's a new way of thinking. But perhaps AI is sort of helping us.
How? How is AI helping
Um,
us?
well, it's helping us in terms of the chat that's in the news about the environmental impact of AI, and it's starting to maybe help people make this connection between, oh, there's a thing that I'm doing on my computer that's having an environmental impact because people are talking about data centers and they're talking about water usage, I'm not sure before that people have really made that connection, or I certainly don't think I've read much in in the kind of in the general press around the environmental impact of digital. It's been quite hard to make those connections. So perhaps it's not a good thing, but it's helping to maybe create a bit of a groundswell in a
Hmm.
good direction.
Yeah. Before we get into how we can actually go about this and move away from this overwhelming, ginormous challenge of making services more sustainable, um, I think it's also quite interesting to hear a little bit more about your journey into this because like you mentioned, you have an environmental study, science study, um, but you didn't go straight into sustainable services out of that study. Like, how did you arrive here?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting story, and it's funny when you reflect on it. I mean, as with many people who are working in this area, they started off doing something completely different, and we used to play a fun game in the office of like, what degree did you do? And the project manager would say, "Oh, I studied history," and the creative director would say, "Oh, I studied furniture making," and you're like, "What?" And then I'd say, "Oh, and, I was working as the UX guy. Oh, I did environmental science," and everyone's looking at me going, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "I don't know. I've got no idea." We're all very aware that we're riding the wave of a new industry that's kind of making it up as it's going along. But yeah, I studied environmental science back and graduated in about 1998, and then used to open the Guardian newspaper on a Wednesday when the environment jobs were out, and there was no job, or there might have been one job, like a conservation job for about 25p an hour, and you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure I can do that. And then, of course, at the time, it was the kind of very much the dot-com bubble. So you'd open the new media section of the newspaper, and it'd be 15 pages of jobs, and I thought, well, I think I need to be doing that, but I've got no idea how I'll do that. Um, but I was working within Leeds University on a research project visualizing the outputs of a research study that was looking at the spread of a waterborne pathogen through the environment. And I was playing around with Macromedia Flash. And I'd never used anything like that. And I was like, I don't know what this thing is, but I loved it. It was nothing better than sticking your headphones on, listen to music, getting a cup of tea, and just creating these visualizations. And it was joyful. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I had no right to be doing it, but I loved it and just sort of really lent into it. And then I kind of had a chance meeting with a web agency who were doing a roadshow in Leeds, and they're an agency called Amaze, who are incredible. And I showed them the stuff I've been doing, and this chap said to me, "Do you realise you're an information architect?" And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Would you like to have an interview?" And so I went to Liverpool and sort of got offered a job as an information architect and leapt into the world of new media. Um, and again, it was a wonderful, exciting, crazy place, full of very creative people, very technical people. And having come from kind of academia, I was like, I've got no idea what any of you are doing, how any of you are doing it. It was wonderfully exciting and thrilling and terrifying. And so I kind of jumped from academia, I suppose. I've had a very clear path in front of me of I'm going to become an academic, but jumped into this new world, and then UX became a thing, and I started, broadening my horizons into doing lots of doing lots of wireframing and all that kind of good stuff, lots of information architecture, but then starting to do lots of user research and playing around with that. And then, so got in there early, really. Um, but only it was only recently I took voluntary redundancy and started thinking, well, what do I want to do next? Where am I going to go? And thought, actually, with this new awareness I have of the environmental impact of the internet, wonder if I could combine the two things together. My kind of training, and for the first time ever, thought, oh, my degree's relevant to my job, which was amazing. And I guess it probably always has been, to be honest, in terms of learning the kind of scientific method, learning about running experiments, having hypotheses, having assumptions, testing things out, running prototypes, all there within the science training, um, which has been really handy actually. And I'd encourage people to certainly adopt that experimental mindset because it's a good survival technique to the world of digital design, I think.
I completely agree. But you quickly skimmed over a very interesting part, and that is you sort of got the time and opportunity to think about what's next. Um, you could have gone into many different directions. You could have
Yeah.
picked up woodworking, or you could have gone on a sailing trip around the world, but you didn't. So, what happened in that moment that made you decide, okay, this is the path I want to explore?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it is very interesting having these kind of moments of, voluntary redundancy. It's like people, it's classically a bit of a turning point in people's lives, isn't it? It's like something finishes that you've been doing for a long time, and you suddenly feel like, oh, okay, I've got a bit of breathing space, and I'm going to make some maybe deliberate choices or whatever. And it's funny you should say woodworking because I decided that when I finished, I was like, I'm going to learn how to make cricket bats. I've always loved sport. I love woodwork. It was a good excuse to not be staring at a screen all day. And I thought, well, why not go and do something different? And so I did look into it and ironically realized that making cricket bats is a very unsustainable thing to try and do because there isn't enough willow around. It's trying to buy raw materials to do things is a really interesting challenge when you're used to working in a digital world. All of a sudden you have to buy tools and have space and raw materials and all of these things. And I thought, okay, well, I can still make cricket bats, but I don't want to give up my career. Like I love what I do. I've met some amazing people. I want to carry on doing it, but I wonder if I could tweak it a little bit. And I guess having learned lots about sustainability, or certainly focused a lot on that in the previous year, just doing hobby projects and things, that felt like the perfect segue. So it's like, well, hold on, the Venn diagram of my interests and my passions, why can't I weave in a bit of this kind of environmental stuff? Because let's face it, it's not going away. We're living in a climate crisis, so we've got to start doing something about it. But I wonder if the internet is contributing so much towards this problem, whether we can start to kind of share more knowledge, educate people of the kind of the impact that the internet's having, but really give them the practical tools to do something about it without overwhelming them. Like that's I'm trying to move people
Mm.
from overwhelm because it's it has the potential to be climate anxiety is a thing, isn't it? It has the potential to be hugely overwhelming, and organizations probably don't know what to do and they know that they need to do something about it. So how can I help to move people from feelings of I'm not sure what to do to I'm going to start making some changes and doing some stuff. So that's very much where I'm focusing my effort.
And I would love to hear more about how to actually do that, because one of the feelings that we might get when listening to topics like this is, oh gosh, design is already so hard. We take so much responsibility for
Yeah, yeah.
so many areas that maybe are even outside of our scope, but somehow we still feel responsible for it. And now we also have to take sustainability and the environment into account. Like, where will we even fit that into our mental space? Um, how do we do this? Where do we start? Like, what is the approach?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's, as I say, like as I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about, thinking about sustainability in the context of the job is hard. Like being a service designer, UXer, whatever you want to call yourself, it's not an easy job. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to think about, and it's constantly changing. And there's, the constant feeling of like, I'm not doing this right. Is everyone else doing it in a different way? Oh, here's a new technique. Oh, here's a new technique. Oh, the world's changed. Oh, AI. Oh, constraint. Oh, client. It's just like potentially I often look at my colleagues and just think, fair play, like you're doing a very hard job that none of your families understand, none of your mates understand. So you've got no, like, what's the social standing of a service designer? Like, it probably doesn't exist. because essentially, if you've done a good job, your work's invisible. So that's a problem. Um, but I had a bit of a eureka moment while working on a project last year, and we'd been asked by we were working on behalf of a UK government website called Talk to Frank, which is a drugs advice website, and it's designed to keep young people safe from the harms of drugs. So it's not there to say don't take drugs. It's there to kind of give people advice in terms of essentially the site's a bit like an A to Z. So if they're thinking of taking a certain drug, they'll say, well, this is what it looks like, and this is what you should expect. And if you're feeling like this is normal. If you're feeling like that, and if your friend's in this situation, this is what you should do. So it's all about harm prevention. And we were doing a bit of work to try and optimize the site for people who are using it on mobile devices. So how can we make sure this site is super fast? People are going to be able to find the information they need to keep them safe from harm in the fastest possible time. Bearing in mind they might be using a dodgy old phone that they inherited from their mum or their dad or someone. They might be in the middle of nowhere. The kind of the use case that I was kind of thinking about was imagining a young person at a festival. So they're at Glastonbury, at the Stone Circle, the middle of nowhere, got maybe a 3G connection. They're probably about to do something they probably shouldn't, or their friend might have done, and they're worried about them and trying to keep them safe from harm. So it was a really good case study in terms of around so almost like around digital exclusion. There's lots of people who are producing digital services who are relying on people to be able to use them to benefit from them, which is which is one thing when you're trying to sell an e-commerce site, but a very different thing when it's about people keeping people safe from harm. So you're assuming they can use the service, they can access it, they can get the information they need. Anyway, so we set about trying to optimize this service to kind of make it work brilliantly for mobile users. And the developer, chap Andy Brace, I worked with, is absolutely amazing. It was very much a development project, so very much a coding project. So he'd get under the bonnet of the site, and it was all about marginal gains, a bit like the kind of British cycling metaphor in terms of everything will help to make the thing go faster, but tweaking this, tweaking that, removing this. And so Andy did an amazing job, and we kind of optimized one kind of happy path, if you like, through the site, through homepage to a drugs page to somewhere else. And the results were staggering in terms of the performance, impact and the savings there. But the unintended consequence was the reduction in the carbon footprint that we didn't even mean to do. It was just something that some of the analytical tools were telling us. I think we used Google Lighthouse, and Andy was using some other tools. Um, and I just thought, hold on. So we've made the site go faster, so it's performing better. That means the user wins because they get their information faster. In this context, it keeps them safe from harm. So the people who use the site benefit. There's a performance benefit. If they were trying to sell something, arguably they'd sell more stuff. So there's a kind of a prosperity profit-based benefit. Obviously, this was public sector, but that's, the outcome was more likely to happen. The planet was benefiting because it had a lower carbon footprint. I was like, this is unbelievable. I've never come across a way of working that has so many benefits. And it's not, and then it made me think, and then so I had this kind of eureka moment that was very much born out of a kind of a client project, if you like, and thought, well, um, so if we're, and it really focused on this idea of minimizing things. So if you minimize things, they go faster. And designers are already doing that. So, less is more is a common theme, isn't it? That's something we already understand. So it made me realize that, oh, we've already got the tools to do this. We're already doing it. So it's not like I've got to learn a new thing. It's just a different way of thinking about the things we're already doing.
Yes, and I less is more. There is a classic book by Edward de Bono called Simplicity. I don't know the exact year in which it
Oh,
was
right.
written, but
Yeah,
it's absolute recommended, not required reading for anyone listening
yeah.
to this episode. The I'm curious, like, okay, so this was your eureka moment.
Yeah.
What lesson did you take away from that you now sort of see is useful to other service design projects?
Yeah, I think one of the lessons was that talking about things. I thought, well, I wonder how interested clients are going to be about me talking about sustainability. There's a challenge. Are they going to care? I think my hypothesis was, well, public sector clients are going to probably ask me about this, and they certainly were in terms of procurement. So sometimes when you're filling out bids, you'll be asked questions to demonstrate when you have. So um, whereas in reality, how interested will my private sector clients be about this? Those hard-nosed e-commerce types. if I turn up and start extolling the virtues of sustainability, they're going to laugh me out the room. They're going to like, all right, tree hugger, see you later. It's just like you've got to be mindful of this stuff. But I thought, well, actually, if I can talk about performance and not even mention sustainability, perhaps performance is a Trojan horse. I can have a sustainability agenda, but maybe never mention that word. So you can choose your language to suit the context of your project, and not be the person. I think there's nothing worse almost than being the kind of potentially the environmental finger wagger. You're wrong. Shame on you. It's like, well, who's ever responded well to that? It's not the way. It's not the way to get things done, is it? So it doesn't work. Um, so talking about it in different terms is very useful.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
using yeah, no, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, so yeah, being able to talk about it in different ways is very useful. Performance is a very important thing that everyone should be. If you're an owner of a specifically a digital service, if you're not interested in performance, I'd probably argue you're in the wrong job. It's a prerequisite, isn't it? But this idea of simplifying, again, like you said, it's not a new idea, but we're using it for now for a different reason. So we should be all questioning, what are we presenting again within, I'm talking on a digital context, but it still works within a service design context. I think it's like, what's the minimum we need to do to try and get the outcome we're trying to get? I mean,
Mm,
that's important way of thinking about things. What are the ingredients on this page that are most likely to give us our outcome? What's our hypothesis of what's going to work? What can we take away from this to make it simpler for people? And that all has an additional benefit.
yes. Though I'm going to challenge you on this one. I agree that
Mm.
focusing on performance and on the KPIs that your clients like focus on. Um, in my experience, talking about removing things, simplifying processes, um, is usually less attractive compared to talking about, oh, we're going to develop this new thing that has all these new shiny whistles and bells. Like in my agency experience, you rarely get hired to take things away and to make things simpler. um, you get hired, of course, to improve the performance, hopefully, and making it simpler is the path to doing that. But still, I don't know. How do you like? Have you been in those conversations? Because I found that difficult.
Yeah, I think the way that you would talk about it in the early stages of projects, that it's like, what's the experience we're trying to create for people? We're gonna enable people to do the thing they want in the quickest and easiest way. They're going to be delighted because they could do that. They'll recommend the service and use it again because it was effortless and almost invisible. The kind of performance side of it is very compelling. We know how to build things that perform amazingly. So I mean, I'd never go in going, we're going to take loads of stuff away. It's like it's not. That's the more of the method of how you
Sure.
do it. It's
Yeah,
like
exactly.
almost like the kind of the earlier conversations are different things. But then there's I guess if there's less there, then there's less to maintain and operate. So there's an efficiency angle in terms of cost of servicing and serving of that as well. So um, but this is really emphasizing the importance of language, isn't it? It's like, I think UX people and service designers are masters of communication and language. We are translators. We're very good at choosing the right language to use in the right context. If we're speaking to our users, conducting research, we're not using technical terms, but then when we convey our insights to our clients, we then translate and we use different language to kind of, so we are a translator between the client and the end user.
Mm.
So I think we're good at this, which is another superpower we've already got in terms of, for people who want to do more of this type of work, I'd argue you're probably already doing it. You're probably very, very adept at using the right language and choosing the right ways of describing things to suit the context of what you're trying to do. And obviously you're always trying to influence things as well. It's like, within reason, I'd like this, I've learned this from this user, or I had this insight. I need to make sure I do right by those users to make sure this becomes truism within the product or service. So, it's something that, again, I think people are already doing, which should hopefully make it easier.
Is there a way, if we are truly user centered and focus on business outcomes, whether they are profit, non-profit,
Mhm.
that we can justify unsustainable services? And the reason I'm asking this is you you could make the argument that if your service is overly complex, that it's not as efficient as it could be and leading to worse business performance, um, then you're not delivering a sustainable service. So sustainability should be baked into the design process if you're doing it well? Question
Hmm.
mark.
Yeah, I think the whole thing around this is we have to be realistic. Like, there's no point in going in going, this. I've got such a strong point of view and agenda around this that I'm going to absolutely railroad everything else at the cost of. We have to appreciate the context within which we're working. So if you're working um, for an organization who are interested in making profit, and they have a business model that's maybe around provision of video, for example, then, well, we know that video is going to have, it's going to use huge amounts of energy to store and transfer that video to users' devices. But we're not going to say, well, I reckon you should change your business model, stop doing video. It's like, well, best of luck with that recommendation. It's like you're going to get laughed out of the room, and you're not going to do particularly well. And I think we have to be pragmatic and not dogmatic, and say, well, actually, let's appreciate. I understand your business model; it makes perfect sense. It's what you have an organizational superpower because of the way you've set up to provide excellent video services, and you've got great content. That's what you're going to do. However, um, let's think about how you can do that in the most sustainable way that has a minimal environmental impact, that has a minimal societal impact. Because that's a broader thing I wanted to talk about, actually, in terms of, people have a responsibility to make sure their services create minimal harm, and that's not just environmental harm,
Mm-hmm.
but it's kind of broader societal harm. So, we've seen the knock-on effect of services in terms of impacts on society, in terms of um, having unintended consequences that people could never have foreseen, or maybe didn't think about foreseeing. So this idea of moving things on from being sustainable to being regenerative. So, it's all well and good thinking, well, let's do let's do no harm. If you do
Mm-hmm.
no harm, you're sustainable. But if you're regenerative, you're doing more good than harm. So how can we move into that area?
Would you be up to sort of take a case study and walk me through it here live?
Yeah, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so I provide a service. I've talked about it a lot here on the show. I run a community for service design professionals.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, let's say you and I have agreed that making that service more sustainable is a good path forward because it's going to help our community members, it's going to hopefully help my business model, and it's going to help our environment. How would we start? Where would we start with such a challenge?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this recently, because I've been working on as a response to, actually, it's interesting seeing the Government Design Service, the GDS within the UK. So, real incredibly pioneering government unit who've really changed I'd say, have made some of the most significant impacts to, I guess, the field of design in the last sort of 15 years or so, who are pioneering, sharing knowledge around good service design through things like the service manual and design principles that become very much best practice for our community and our industry. And they've recently added a new design principle around minimizing environmental impact. So that felt like, oh, this is great. Someone important is telling us to do something, so we can all react to that. And it's like a call to arms. I thought, well, actually, then, so this is all well and good. Someone important is telling me to do something, but what the hell do I do about it? And so I started thinking about, people should have a plan around this stuff. They should have a strategy. And so I started to pull together a template that has a list of activities of things you can start to do that will help you to minimize your environmental impact. So I would, in your situation, start saying, well, if you were to run through something like that, that helps you identify where you can work to kind of reduce your impact, it gives you a practical set of things to get started with, and also starts to help you think about some of the aspects of your service you may not have thought about in the past. Like, oh, I haven't thought about it like that. Or where might we be making an impact? It may be that a huge part of your community is online. And so, oh, that's interesting. So there's a huge digital component. Let's look at some of the page weights, and let's look at um, some of the work I've been focusing on is this idea of, like, you can't decarbonize everything. It's too much. It's overwhelming. So why don't you try and decarbonize key user journeys within your digital product? So say if you had a key journey that people were using, I mean, it may not be applicable in your context at all, but let's just pick off almost like the worst offenders, the pages with the heaviest page weight or the poorly performing journeys, and start optimizing those. Um, So yeah, slowly, little bit by bit, don't make it massive. Give people a chance of actually making a difference.
And what if a lot of the touch points aren't digital or don't have the digital aspect? Like I with digital, the big benefit is that you have an objective measure,
Yeah.
uh, like how many bits are sent over the line, and that you can translate that into how much energy is used. What if you don't have that digital component?
Yeah, you're right. And actually, that was one of the reasons I thought I start with digital because it feels like the easy bit. I was wrong. It's not easy, but it's easier in terms of there are lots of website, lots of carbon calculators. There's the website carbon calculator, eco grader, cardamom. There's loads of them, which is great. And there's more and more of these services, so it's relatively easy to get a benchmark and to get a sense of like, oh, we're at this level, and let's work out some stuff to do. And you're right, with non-digital things, it's harder. But then actually thinking about it, lots of organizations are reporting, from a carbon point of view, and they're reporting against all of their operations, many of which will be non-digital things. Um, so the protocols will exist around kind of the measurement and estimation in terms of carbon calculations as well as other things. And also people like Ned Gartside have been working on developing principles to follow in terms of design principles around services that are very much not just focusing on digital things. So again, there's some overarching principles that you can apply to those sorts of endeavors to kind of minimize your impact. Um, so yeah, potentially it's harder. I haven't thought a lot about it. I've been very much diving into this digital world, but it does feel like this idea of optimizing journeys still carries true because when you're using services, you're going on journeys through those services and you have interactions with different touch points. So um, how you calculate the impact of those things may be harder. But again, I think it's important that people don't get too tied up in trying to exactly calculate the answers because nothing's going to be perfect, and you could tie yourself in knots in it and think, "Oh, this is too hard. I'm not going to do it," and that's what we want to avoid.
And that calculation or that measurement aspect can trip up many people.
Oh yeah,
Like you said, it's almost impossible to actually quantify this stuff if you don't have the measurement in place, which in most cases will not be the case. So you inspired me to think about, okay, so how would I do this? Like, what would be my first step? You mentioned that you have a template. Um, one of the and tell me if this makes sense, but one of the ideas that I had is we obviously eat our own dog food. We have journey management, journey maps. And my idea was like, what if the environment or sustainability would just be a big lane in our existing journey maps? And we would just comment on what is the environmental impact, what is the social impact, what is business impact from a social perspective, and just creating that awareness within each step without necessarily quantifying it, I think would already be super helpful. Would that make sense?
I think it's an excellent idea. I mean, it's that's absolutely brilliant in terms of adding something to something you're already doing that could just be an excuse to start a new conversation. And
Mm,
and actually it's a really nice. I recently did a talk with Climate UX, which is one of Lou Rosenfeld's groups, and that was very much talking about this idea of add an extra lane, add an extra swim lane.
yeah.
Um, Certainly in the context of journey maps, or if you're creating service blueprints, user journey maps, whatever you want to call them. So again, it's something you might already be doing, and it does lend itself beautifully to visualizing these things. I had this idea of like visualizing a carbon footprint, or even using probably more easily using like an energy efficiency rating, as if you sort of things you'd see on your fridge or your washing machine if you're buying like one of those things. Um, because it's something that people are familiar with. And so if you show a senior manager, imagine like a journey map, each stage has a rating against it. You show that to someone within an organization, say, you're F's the whole way through. And you're not even talking about, because I think the issue with kind of measuring carbon or talking about tons of carbon, like what does that mean? Like, okay, this who knows what this cause generate in terms of, oh, we generated 5 kilograms of carbon. Is that okay? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Who talks about
Uh-huh.
carbon? Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. But
Yeah.
if you flip it into things that make more sense to people, it's like, oh, an F rating. I don't know what that means in terms of carbon, but I know it's not very good. And I want to be a B. And so but I totally agree. It's just adding those little things to the things we're already doing could be a masterstroke, I think.
Yeah. It could be the question is like you mentioned adding a rating that could be subjective and a conversation piece, which already is
Yeah.
super helpful. The other question that I had around this is, so if we're not objectively measuring it, and we don't have the means to do so when we're not working with digital services, how do you feel we could get a good sense and confidence that we are moving in the right way, right? If there's no benchmark, like a benchmark or an like, I'm trying to, I don't know, remove a step here, like removing things. Yeah, that sounds like it would reduce resources. But how do we know we're actually making progress?
Yeah, I suppose it's starting to think about where you might be potentially having an impact and flagging those things and identifying those things and working on them. But then maybe looking for different sorts of signals. I mean, if your users are telling you, or you're getting a sense that your service is becoming easier, quicker, simpler, easier to use, then maybe by virtue of that, you're then using less resources to
Yeah,
deliver that service to them.
yeah,
So there may be these kind of slightly different indicators that you're heading in the right direction. But
proxies.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, absolutely. And the other side of it is like it's not just about saving electrical energy. It's also about saving people's cognitive energy. It's
Mm,
like, why are we demanding so much of our users? It's like, why do I have to be almost like feel like I need a university degree to apply for a driver's license or do
mm,
these things that
mm-hmm,
I'm doing in my everyday life. So there's different ways of thinking about things. It's like let's create things that have lower impacts on people's lives because we can only
mm,
we generally inevitably get an increased sense of the importance of the things we're working on because it's what we spend our waking hours thinking about because
mm.
it's the nature of the job. But in reality, as I mentioned earlier, we want these things to be invisible. So potentially there are some proxies that we could think about that may help.
I like the idea of, for instance, mapping mental resources.
Yeah.
If I go back to my community, this has been a design principle from day one. I can
All
give a
right.
concrete example. Like um, by design, we do not have a instant messaging platform within our community. We don't
Okay.
use Slack or
Yeah.
Discord or WhatsApp as a group communication channel. And my philosophy there was that it's doing more harm than good.
Mm.
It's causing fear of missing out. It's overwhelming people. It's causing a high noise to signal ratio. So we're just not going to implement that within our community. Now, I never thought about that from a sustainability perspective, but I did think about this from a cognitive load and a mental well-being perspective. So
Yeah.
that could be a simple example.
Yeah. I mean, you're already doing it. It's amazing, and it's amazing. It's a nice to sort of that emphasizes the importance of principles as well. Does it's like where are we being true to our principles and where we're not. But actually, what you've said, you've absolutely nailed it. It's like where are we doing more harm than good? And if you ask yourself that question, you haven't even used the word sustainability, but you could apply that in so many different contexts. It's like, yeah, what do we mean by harm? Okay, well, we mean, oh yeah, why are we expecting so much of people's attention? Like that's arrogant. Like why do we think we're so important? And people already, oh, the dog's just been sick, my kid's late for school, the washing machine's broken, I don't want to do this thing I'm need. It's like let's be real about the kind of context of people's lives. So actually considering that idea of where are we doing more harm than good and removing those harms and then almost flipping it seems a weird thing to say, like where can we do more good than harm? Like why aren't we in that space? And that for me is that's the that is the final frontier. That is the vision that everyone should be aspiring to. Like why
Yeah,
aren't we going beyond sustainability to try and do more good than harm? Like
yeah,
that
yeah.
should be the holy grail.
And in this case, again, I can relate to what you're saying. Um, Instead of adding a channel that might increase anxiety and the fear of missing out, we're actively thinking about how do we build confidence within our
Mm.
members? How do we help them to show up as leaders within their communities? And I think that's the thing you mean with the opposite end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that's made me think about is the importance of this isn't about just stripping everything out and making, you're like, I've made it really simple. Oh, well done. No one can use it. It's not effective anymore. Well done. It's like that's completely
The most
ridiculous.
sustainable service is the service that isn't there, right? So
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah. It's like,
yeah,
well, okay, we've done a really good job at sustainability. However, the bad news is there's nothing there.
there's no business anymore. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, so that's sort of a win. There's some bad news as well. I mean, and I think that brings me back to the kind of the importance of kind of involving your service users in the whole of this process. It's like, what do they, you have to do that research. The kind of meeting user needs is still so important. And it's why I kind of had this sort of realization that again, this is all about, user experience. It's all about the work that we've already done in terms of we need to understand the core needs of the people we're serving so that we can serve those needs excellently. But there's no point really in doing anything beyond that other than meeting your commercial needs or whatever they may be. So it just keeps you true and honest to the things that people are trying to do. And they'll tell you, I mean, we know from research,
Mm,
conducting research, it's very clear when people are having a bad time. They'll tell you, you can see it in their faces.
mhm,
You're like, oh, you seem to be really cross. It's like, yeah, I can't believe they're asking me to give them my details. I only want this. It's like, that's
mm.
really, you know, as a researcher, you can see this.
Yeah, and as we're talking about this, it's becoming much more accessible by the minute to me because again, if like we could go into the journey maps that we have and create lanes around um, the mental energy, the resources that we use, so the materials, like the energy within the business,
Hmm.
and we can like I won't say it's easy, but it's not going to be very hard to have some um clarity or direction on those topics. Like if you have design principles, like I said, around we want to make sure that we don't induce anxiety within our users, like that's there you go. That's pretty easy. Add it to your swim lane and see how that goes. Like what are you
Yeah,
doing with mental energy?
yeah, and it may be linked to existing metrics around customer satisfaction. So it's like that's
Exactly.
something you're already doing.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
so so that's not a new thing, and it may be due to you may be trying to reduce cost of serving. So again, that's your ultimate objective. It's like why are we spending so much money on whatever it may be? Um, and you may be doing it ultimately for a sustainability reason, or you may not be. But every again, it's this idea. It feels like maybe the perfect solution in terms of everyone winning. It's like, oh, it makes it cheaper, it makes it faster, it makes it easier to use. It's like I can't ever remember coming across something that has so many benefits. It was just like, wow, this is it.
Mm. So if that's the case, and let's assume that it is, why aren't we there yet? Why are you and I having this conversation and trying to raise awareness if it's
I
so
think,
obvious?
yeah, well, I don't know if it is so obvious. I mean, it's only because I spent a lot of time thinking about it and been in a privileged position to kind of have that time, maybe. And there's the reality of everyday working life, isn't it? I mean, there's probably a lack of awareness around the problem in terms of certainly that link between digital and a physical impact. So that I'm fairly certain that's definitely there. Although that's maybe shortening that gap shortening. Um, there's probably do people have the confidence to talk about this and to kind of introduce it into project environments where an interesting parallel I've always thought about is accessibility. Accessibility is something that it's hugely important. That's a legal requirement, certainly in the UK. But it still feels like an effort to try and make it happen on projects. I mean, I had a recent example where it was just like I just felt like I was talking absolute gobbledygook, like even daring to mention it, and it was like, "You're going to give us something else to do?" The developers were just like up in arms, and I was like, "Oh no, like this is going to be a nightmare." And it also felt like, oh, it feels like it's 2005 again. I remember having these conversations again and again. But again, it's like there's lots of reasons to do it. It has lots of benefits. It's quite an interesting analogy or metaphor or parallel. Um, so perhaps there's lack of awareness. Perhaps there's certainly a growing body of information and knowledge. There's some great books and great information resources that people can lean on. Um, so and again, how high a priority is it from the perspective of the people who are running these services? Is it feasible? Do they know what to do? Are they getting permission to do it? So again, it's another wicked problem, isn't it?
Well, yeah, yes and no, because in your example, if accessibility from the get go is one of the design principles, because we understand why it is
Mm.
important, probably your conversation with the developers would have gone down dramatically different.
Oh yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And in my case, like, I don't want to induce anxiety with my users. That's a design principle. Makes all the other things a lot easier. The challenge is, of course, when you are not involved in setting up these design principles
Mm.
on a higher level. Like that's the more challenging aspect, and I think that's the reality where most of us are.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're right. I mean, a lot of projects, a lot of people don't get a chance to be involved at maybe early stages. You know, they may get brought on at later stages of the project and think, "Oh, this is a bit weird. Like, why aren't we doing this? And why are they focusing on that thing? That doesn't make sense." And there's a lot of that going on, isn't it? And I've been in a lucky position to kind of set lots of projects up and try and embed. I get the opportunity to embed the things that I feel are important and deliberately talk about them from the earliest
Mm,
possible stage
mm,
and brief a team and say, right, this is what the game is. This is what's important within this. But I think in terms of individuals, they could have it almost as part of their practice. Like, this is the way I work. I am a sustainable service designer. This is in my blood. This is just the way I am.
mm.
This is and not, you don't have to bang on about it, but just say, oh no, I do. Oh, it's just something I do with my journey maps. I just put in this layer. It's no big deal. I mean, that's the way to do it, isn't it? It's like, don't be the kind of antagonist, the troublemaker. Be the person who and talk about the benefits of, like, oh yeah, we want to make this easy for users. Oh yeah, of course.
And more profitable
Yeah.
and more long term. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so again, there's a skill in terms of talking about it in those ways, but I think the benefit of this, of course, is climate change and the impact of not doing this is affecting everyone. So you would hope that would help to make it happen. It's like, it's not just, oh, there's a group who are disadvantaged over there, but I'm not one of them. So I don't need to think about them. It's like, well, let's wake up, everyone. This isn't going away. The situation isn't getting better. So you would hope that would help, but of course, the reality on projects is those things aren't always a priority, and I know that. Of course, that's the real thing. So again, we have to be pragmatic. But we are all climate designers. Like, everything we are doing has an impact. So we're all in this already. That's not pretend we're not.
And yeah, we have the opportunity to do it either consciously or uh, accidentally and bear the consequences.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting thinking about that. I was talking about that idea of the Trojan horse. I was like, well, I've got this thing. I want to do it. I don't think anyone's going to really care. So I have to hide it within something else. And I was like, you know what? Sod it. I'm going to talk about what I really believe in, and I'm not going to try and hide it. And I'm going to nail my colours to the mast, if that makes any sense, and say, no, this is the reason I'm doing this. And if people don't want to listen, then I probably don't want to work with them. You know what? It's like more of that, let's be bold and be honest and confident. And then that feels good as a practitioner. I think, having a purpose, going back to that kind of how to do this as a practitioner, it's wild. It feels so good. It really helps because, again, being a designer is a hard job. Having something that gives you a purpose or makes your work feel purposeful um, helps you get out of bed in the morning. Because let's face it, some projects are awful. Some projects are dead hard. Others are a breeze, and careers go up and down and ebb and flow, and you've got to keep yourself interested. So it's a good survival technique as well.
If you had to give someone who's inspired by our conversation a first step that they can take tomorrow, next week on their project where sustainability absolutely as a word or topic isn't on the agenda, what would
Mm.
you say to them?
I think it would be a really interesting thing for them just to think, right, I wonder, I'm just going to do a small thing, and I have the agency and the permission to do that small thing. It might be adding the lane to the swim lane. It may be raising the topic of sustainability within a meeting. It may be adding it into a design principle. There's so many things that you can do to start a conversation. It might be just, oh, I mean, it might be a casual mention on a Slack channel. Oh, I'm interested. Anyone got any resources? Or deliberately sharing resources, planting seeds. I found this really interesting book, Sustainable Web Design by Tom Greenwood. It's absolutely brilliant. I loved it. I bought a few copies. I've just left them in the. I mean, um, you can do it by stealth, which is quite good fun. But I mean, we have a good community of. There is a strong community ethic, and I've always seen it in the organisations I've worked with of sharing information because everything's changing all the time. So again, being that person who's deliberately, I'm going to do a bit of learning. I'm going to share what I learn and see what happens. And then you
Mm,
look for. Isn't it joyful then when you see the first indication of someone saying it back to you? Oh, I think so. Let's talk about sustainability. Like, yes.
yeah. And you mentioned that there are interesting resources out there already, like on top of mind. where would you recommend people start looking?
Yeah, well, there's certainly some amazing books, and Tom's book I absolutely love reading, was hugely impactful actually. So that's one I'd mention, and then there's tons more. Tim Frick's got an O'Reilly book, which is sustainable web design. Can't remember the name, but there's a ton of books, and it's great because this is kind of creating more and more resources. The web sustainability guidelines are incredible. You know, they're a W3C set of guidelines. They're still, nothing's ever finished, is it? So of course they're being revised and improved, and there's probably 90 odd guidelines which are, they're in the classic W3C format, so they're not the easiest to read and understand, but there's so much good stuff in there, and loads of great sustainable UX resources that people can Google. So there's much. I thought I was kind of leading a bit of a lone. I felt I was ploughing my own furrow, if that metaphor makes any sense, or that idiom. This is just me. No one else is doing this, and I started to look. It's like there are so many people doing this, and they've been doing it for a long time. And how have I not noticed? So, as with anything, you start to kind of follow some different people, tune into a different signal, and you're like, oh wow, this is amazing. There's so much, so many resources out there.
Maybe you can share your top
Yeah,
five with
definitely.
me, and then I'll add them in the show notes so that we
Yeah, of
don't have
course.
to
Yeah.
curate the entire internet and have some starting points that you have curated for us.
Yeah,
So
of
that would
course.
be super helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
James, one of the thing that we do on the show to wrap things up is to ask our guests, what do you feel would be a good question for us to think about once this episode is over and we're taking a shower, reflecting on our day, sitting in the garden, enjoying the sun? What would be an interesting question?
Yeah, I think the thing I keep coming back to is this idea of minimizing. So, like, the question would be, how can I minimize this? Like, that's it. And it might be that you might be redesigning a homepage, you might be redesigning some kind of touch point or an offline touch point or whatever it might be. You might be writing a recruitment brief, you might be writing a report or an email. I mean, it could be anything. It's like, how can I minimize that? And that's it. It's as simple as that. And that kind of, I think that will help to kind of create the kind of almost a memory trigger to do that in different contexts as well. So very simple thing. How can I minimize?
Interesting. So the next episode of the Service Design Show will be 2.5 minutes instead of an hour. And we're just going to publish shorts and TikTok videos.
Well, I saw the rage. I've heard, these short format
minimizing.
videos. What the
We're
kids
minimizing.
Want. We haven't got an attention span anymore. So yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing to think about. Like, how do you minimize things without taking away the essence and the core of what it's supposed to do, and question whether or not you're already at that level.
Yeah, absolutely.
James, thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Pleasure.
And I'm sure inspiring a few and giving hope and optimism to the rest, that we can get there, and that it's that we should eat the elephant with one spoon at a time. I think that's the saying. So thanks for coming on and sharing.
Thanks, Mark. I've had a great time. Thank you.
Well, that was a thought-provoking conversation with James. I keep coming back to his idea of using performance or user experience as a kind of Trojan horse when talking to clients about sustainability. It's such a practical way to reframe the discussion, moving it from a nice to have to something that directly impacts business and user outcomes. For me, it underscores how interconnected these elements really are within good service design. My sincere thanks to James for his time and for equipping us with these actionable strategies. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, please do me one big favor. Click that like button on this video and please do leave a short comment if you haven't done so already. Not to feed the algorithm, but to let me know whether or not we are on the right track by addressing topics like this. Finally, before we part ways, please take a moment to reflect and celebrate that by joining us today, you've directed your attention towards learning and growing as a professional. So, from everyone who you are going to impact through your work, thank you for taking the time and making the commitment. My name is Mark Fontein, and I look forward to having you with us for a new conversation on The Service Design Show. Take care and see you soon.